Hey guys, today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. Unsolved, high-profile crimes have always carried an air of mystery and even a hint of the supernatural, often becoming the subject of intense discussions, speculation, and even academic research. The louder the case, the more it is discussed across the media, increasing the chances that one day it might inspire a dramatic or documentary film or a book, bringing new people to explore the story from entirely different perspectives. Moreover, acts of wrongdoing for which no one is held accountable can highlight gaps in the legal system and raise difficult but critically important questions about justice, ethics, and morality. The case of the mysterious disappearance of a young college student, Adrienne Salinas, shook the entire state of Arizona in 2013. Hundreds of officers, volunteers, and concerned citizens joined the search efforts. It's likely that Adrienne's remains would have never been discovered if not for a sudden and fierce natural disaster. It seemed as if nature itself was trying to assist in solving the case. Sadly, the full truth behind the tragic loss of this bright young woman remains a mystery. Authorities had at least a couple of individuals they considered persons of interest, but they were never able to prove any connection due to a lack of solid evidence. Despite massive media coverage and public interest, the true circumstances surrounding Adrienne's fate remain unresolved to this day. Adrienne Salinas was born on November 5, 1993, in Phoenix, the capital of Arizona. She was the first child of Rick and Pauline Salinas. 2 years later, their family grew when their son Nathaniel was born. It seemed like they had a long, happy life ahead of them. But sadly, shortly after Nathaniel's birth, Pauline fell seriously ill. After several years of battling a relentless illness, she passed away at a young age. At the time of this heartbreaking event, Adrienne was just 5 years old, and Nathaniel had only recently turned 3. Left a widower, Rick took on the enormous task of raising his son and daughter alone, working tirelessly to provide for them while making sure they always felt loved and supported. He became both a father and a mother to them, carrying the full weight of care and upbringing on his shoulders. Rick balanced a job at a local company with coaching activities at the school where Adrienne and Nathaniel studied. This allowed him not only to earn a better living, but also to spend more time with his son and daughter, staying close to their interests and hobbies. He coached Nathaniel's football team and led Adrienne's volleyball practices. The bond between Rick and his son and daughter was incredibly strong. Adrienne and Nathaniel shared everything with their father, their troubles, their worries, and their dreams. They trusted him completely and knew he would always be there for them, no matter what. Adrienne grew into a cheerful, open-hearted, and incredibly friendly young woman. She had no trouble making friends, and people adored her for her sincerity, kindness, and sense of humor. She was also stunningly beautiful, with a model-like appearance and an athletic figure, which naturally attracted a lot of attention. When Adrienne was 14, she met a young man named Francisco Artiga. They hit it off immediately. Francisco was only a year older than Adrienne and attended the same school. They quickly discovered they had a lot in common and began seeing each other almost every day. What started as a friendship soon evolved into a romantic connection by the time they reached their senior years. Adrienne fell deeply for Francisco. It was her first true and powerful love. On the surface, it seemed like Francisco felt the same. They were often seen together, and their circle of friends regarded them as a happy couple. During their teenage years, Francisco became Adrienne's first serious romantic experience. However, despite this closeness, he refused to define their bond as a committed relationship. He often said he was too young to settle down, that he still wanted to enjoy life freely without any constraints. Francisco openly met and flirted with other girls, sometimes getting involved in brief flings. Yet each time, he would eventually return to Adrienne without offering any explanations or apologies. He knew Adrienne's feelings for him were strong enough that she would always take him back. Despite never making promises about a future together, their emotional connection remained deep, and they could never stay apart for long. As for Adrienne, she patiently waited, hoping that eventually Francisco would realize they were meant to be together. She tried not to show her jealousy, even though it hurt every time she saw him with someone else. Adrienne remained loyal to Francisco, believing that her love and faithfulness would eventually be recognized. Over time, it seemed like Francisco was starting to take their relationship more seriously, and Adrienne believed they were growing stronger together. Unfortunately, that turned out to be just an illusion. Back in high school, Adrienne had already decided she wanted to pursue a career in journalism, and she moved confidently toward that goal. After graduation, she enrolled at the prestigious University of Arizona, majoring in broadcast journalism and public relations. Even though Adrienne continued her education in her hometown, she chose to move out of her family home and start living independently. She settled into a spacious apartment located in a quiet neighborhood, which she shared with two close friends, Alexandra Rios and Ashley Dugan. The three had been close since high school, trusted each other completely, and had a strong bond. Each of them had their own room, giving everyone personal space while maintaining a comfortable living arrangement. Rick supported his daughter's decision to move, especially since she chose a place just a 20-minute drive away from the family house. They spoke frequently over the phone and could visit each other anytime. On her 18th birthday, Rick had gifted Adrienne a car, making it easy for her to come home nearly every other day. College life suited Adrienne well. She excelled academically and enjoyed a vibrant and busy social life. However, during her second semester, Adrienne started experiencing a persistent, severe cough that refused to go away. At first, she thought it was just a regular cold, tried treating it at home, and hoped to recover without needing a doctor. Unfortunately, her condition worsened rapidly. Breathing became difficult, and coughing fits plagued her day and night. Adrienne continued to ignore her symptoms until one night she had to be rushed to the hospital by emergency services in critical condition. Doctors diagnosed her with an advanced fungal infection that had severely damaged her lungs. The situation was so serious that Adrienne had to undergo emergency surgery to remove a large part of her left lung that had been irreversibly affected. Despite the severity of her condition, Adrienne's young body fought hard, and she recovered quickly. She was discharged from the hospital within a month and continued her recovery at home. Just a few weeks later, she was back at university, easily catching up on her coursework. On June 14, 2013, Adrienne and her roommates decided to throw a party at their apartment to celebrate one of their birthdays. About 40 guests attended, including Francisco. However, according to those present that night, Adrienne spent most of the evening alone, locked away in her room. The reason behind her isolation was an argument with Francisco that happened shortly before midnight. The young man had been openly flirting with another girl at the party, ignoring Adrienne completely. It's important to note that Adrienne had remained loyal to Francisco, never entertaining attention from other guys, and had hoped he would respect her in the same way. Yet Francisco continued to insist that he wasn't ready to settle down and didn't want to be tied to any commitments. Their confrontation escalated, and after a brief but emotional exchange, Adrienne locked herself in her room, hurt and upset. Later, Francisco knocked on her door, and they spent some time together in private. Afterward, they both left the apartment. Sometime later, Adrienne returned alone. She entered her room, grabbed a few belongings, and left again. That was the last time anyone saw her. The following day, Alexandra and Ashley woke up around noon dealing with heavy hangovers. The apartment was a mess. Trash, empty bottles, disposable plates with leftover food scattered everywhere, broken furniture and clothes tossed around. As the roommates started cleaning up, they initially didn't realize Adrienne was missing. They assumed she was sleeping behind her closed bedroom door and didn't disturb her. Even after realizing Adrienne wasn't in the apartment, her roommates didn't immediately raise the alarm. They simply assumed she had stayed over at Francisco's place, remembering that the two had left the party together. As a result, nearly 2 days passed without anyone looking for Adrienne, unaware that something far more serious might have happened. June 16th arrived. Father's Day in the United States. Rick Salinas was eagerly anticipating his daughter's visit, as they had always celebrated the day together as a family. But Adrienne didn't show up, nor did she call, and her phone was turned off. This immediately worried Rick, and he decided to drive to his daughter's apartment. Adrienne's friends were surprised to see him and admitted they hadn't seen her for 2 days. They explained they hadn't been concerned, thinking she might have been staying with her father or had gone to Francisco's. After contacting Francisco and learning he also hadn't seen Adrienne since the night of the party, Rick wasted no time. He went straight to the police and reported his daughter missing. When detectives arrived at the apartment, their first step was to piece together the timeline from the night Adrienne was last seen. Every detail mattered, and nothing could be overlooked. First, they needed to identify everyone who had attended the party and interview each guest. They also conducted a thorough search of Adrienne's room and found a few concerning clues. For one, some of Adrienne's personal belongings were still there, including her wallet with her bank cards, her cell phone, and her driver's license, even though her roommates claimed she had taken these with her when she left. Even more troubling, detectives found Adrienne's car key lying on the floor near her bedside table. She didn't have a spare key, but her car was not parked at the apartment either. This raised an immediate question. Where was the vehicle if the only key to start it was still in her room? Naturally, Francisco became the first person of interest, and detectives brought him in for questioning right away. Francisco admitted that he and Adrienne had gotten into a serious argument that night, triggered by her jealousy over his behavior at the party. However, he insisted they had made up and decided to leave together to go back to his place. According to Francisco, during the drive, Adrienne reignited the argument and eventually demanded that he pull over and let her out. He said he complied and left her to walk alone into the night. Around 3 a.m., Adrienne returned to the apartment, where the party was still ongoing, though most guests were heavily intoxicated and hardly noticed her presence. At that point, she began repeatedly calling Francisco, making around 50 calls, none of which he answered. Francisco later claimed he had gone to sleep and had his phone set to silent. Adrienne also sent him a text message that read, "I'm coming over." She then grabbed her belongings, including her keys, got into her car, and drove off. Sometime later, she apparently returned to the apartment once more, possibly changed clothes, left her wallet, phone, and keys behind, and disappeared again. The major question remained, what happened to her vehicle, and where had Adrienne gone? The answer to the mystery of Adrienne's missing car came after investigators reviewed reports of traffic incidents from that night. Around 4 a.m., a witness had called the authorities to report seeing a silver Chevrolet lose control and crash into a curb, blowing out the front tires and tearing off the front bumper. The man had intended to approach the vehicle to check if the driver needed help, but before he could, the car suddenly sped off despite the visible damage. He assumed the driver was likely under the influence and had fled to avoid getting into trouble. Fortunately, he memorized the license plate number and reported it to the police. The vehicle was identified as Adrienne's. The very next day, as the search for the missing college student intensified, Francisco and Rick Salinas were out combing the area when they stumbled upon Adrienne's abandoned car in a small alley just a few blocks from her apartment. True to the witness's account, the car had blown out front tires and a nearly detached bumper. Crime scene investigators were immediately dispatched to examine the vehicle for evidence. However, they found no signs of blood, no indications of a struggle, and no unfamiliar fingerprints. The car had been locked and even armed with its alarm system. Based on all the information collected, detectives were able to piece together a likely sequence of events. Adrienne and Francisco had a major argument, then seemingly made up and left together in his car. During the ride, another fight broke out, and Adrienne asked to be dropped off. She walked back to her apartment, tried reaching Francisco multiple times, and when she couldn't get through, decided to drive to him. However, under the influence, Adrienne lost control of her car, crashed it, and then chose to flee the scene, possibly fearing the consequences for her driving privileges. Toward dawn, she returned to her apartment again, changed clothes, and, for reasons unknown, left behind her wallet, cell phone, and car keys before heading out once more. The pressing question remained: where did Adrienne go without money or a phone? What could have happened to her after that? And was Francisco involved? Investigators initially suspected him, but soon ruled him out after he agreed to a polygraph test and passed. Before leaving the apartment for the last time, Adrienne had tried to order a cab, but without success. She then called a small local private transport company, and that became the last call made from her phone. The company was owned by Thomas Simon and his son, Thomas Simon Jr., both of whom detectives needed to interview. Instead of bringing them into the station, investigators opted for phone interviews. Thomas Sr. answered from the office, while Thomas Jr. pulled over to the side of the road to take the call. He was in the middle of driving another customer. The younger Simon explained that a young woman had indeed called him that night. Since he was currently busy with another fare, she agreed to walk to a nearby gas station where he could pick her up once he finished his drop-off. However, when Thomas Jr. arrived at the agreed location, Adrienne was nowhere to be found. He tried calling her, but she didn't answer. After waiting a short while, he simply drove away. Thomas Simon Jr.'s account was backed up by security footage from the gas station. Cameras showed him arriving there around 4:30 a.m., waiting for nearly 15 minutes, and then driving away without picking anyone up. Later that evening, police received a call from a woman who shared concerns about Thomas Jr.'s behavior. As it turned out, she had been a passenger in his cab when police contacted him. According to her, after taking the call, Thomas Jr. appeared visibly nervous. Once he hung up, he stepped out of the vehicle, opened the trunk, and retrieved a saw. This alarming information prompted authorities to arrange an in-person interview with Thomas Jr. and secure a warrant to search his vehicle and home. However, the search yielded nothing suspicious. No saw was found in the trunk, no blood evidence was discovered, and no immediate grounds for charges emerged. Throughout the questioning and search, Thomas Jr. exhibited signs of irritation and even aggressive behavior. He refused to answer further questions or submit to a polygraph test. Despite his suspicious demeanor, investigators found no solid evidence against him. The investigation quickly hit a wall. New leads were scarce, and Adrienne seemed to have vanished without a trace. Despite the grim circumstances, there remained a glimmer of hope that she might still be found alive. Over a month passed since Adrienne's disappearance when the dry, arid state of Arizona was suddenly struck by a powerful storm. On July 21, 2013, massive rains and thunderstorms hit the eastern part of Phoenix. Severe flooding followed, with rivers overflowing and sweeping away everything in their path. The storm turned out to be one of the most destructive the area had seen in a decade. On August 6, 2013, after the floodwaters had receded, a local resident walking his dog through the debris-covered landscape stumbled upon human remains. Believing he had found the body of a drowning victim, he immediately notified law enforcement. The remains were transported to the forensic lab, where experts determined that the individual had passed away over a month earlier. The body was that of a young woman, and given the visible surgical scars and the missing section of lung tissue, investigators quickly suspected the remains belonged to Adrienne Salinas. DNA testing later confirmed the identification. Due to the advanced decomposition, the exact cause of death could not be determined. It was also impossible to confirm whether Adrienne had suffered any form of physical or aggressive assault before her passing. No foreign DNA was recovered from the remains either. Notably, the body was missing the left hand. However, the damage was so extensive that it was unclear whether the hand had been removed intentionally or had detached due to the force of the floodwaters. The body was found roughly 30 miles from where Adrienne had last been seen, but given the direction of the flood currents, it appeared she had been carried downstream. Investigators were unable to pinpoint the original location where the remains had been hidden before the storm hit. Despite extensive searches, including the use of tracking dogs, no additional evidence or personal belongings of Adrienne were found. The cause of her death remained unknown. There were no gunshot wounds, no stab marks, and no clear indications of how she had lost her life. The investigation once again hit a dead end, and eventually, The case was put on hold due to a lack of new leads. However, nearly 2 years after the mysterious disappearance and death of Adrienne Salinas, a man named Kim Azaria came forward to the police, claiming he suspected one of his acquaintances, a man named Brian Patrick Miller, might have been involved. Miller was a controversial and eccentric figure, known in certain circles by the nickname the Zombie Hunter. Despite being well into his 40s, he was a regular at Comic-Cons, themed parties, cosplay meetups, and similar events. He was almost always seen in costume, fully embracing the character he had created for himself. In everyday life, Brian was quiet, brooding, and extremely introverted. But once he put on his costume, he transformed into a charismatic yet unsettling figure. He even customized his car to match his persona, giving it a battered post-apocalyptic look, complete with fake blood splatters, as if straight out of a zombie movie. More importantly, in early 2015, Miller was charged in connection with 2 long unsolved crimes from over 2 decades earlier. In 1992, 22-year-old Angela Brasso disappeared without a trace. Later, her body was discovered in an Arizona canal. Evidence showed she had been attacked and that parts of her body, including her hand and foot, were removed. The second victim was 17-year-old Melanie Bernas, who went missing in 1993. Her body was found not far from a river. She had also suffered an assault, and parts of her body were missing. Despite extensive investigations, no suspect had ever been caught at the time. For years, both crimes remained unsolved. Biological material collected from the scenes linked the 2 cases to a single perpetrator, but without a match in any DNA database, the trail went cold. Then, in 2015, Miller unknowingly brought attention to himself by submitting a DNA sample while participating in a family ancestry search program. Someone had given Brian a kit from Family Tree DNA as part of their Family Finder service. When Miller uploaded his DNA profile, the system flagged a match, not to long-lost relatives, but to the forensic database tied to unsolved crimes. Kim Azaria, who had known Miller for many years, kept personal journals. After learning about Brian's alleged past crimes, Kim grew suspicious that Miller could have been involved in Adrienne's case as well. Reviewing his notes from that time, Azaria discovered that Brian had attended a party the night Adrienne disappeared, a gathering held just a few blocks from her apartment. Miller had even posted photos from the event on social media, complete with geotagged locations. The timeline and location matched the last known sighting of Adrienne. It was entirely plausible that she could have encountered Miller after stepping outside. Adding to the suspicion, Brian worked at a venue located along the river downstream, the same river where Adrienne's remains were eventually found. The information Kim Azaria provided was intriguing, but needed thorough verification. Police conducted a series of searches at Miller's home, but finding anything useful there proved nearly impossible. His house resembled a hoarder's den, every room packed to the ceiling with an overwhelming mix of books, comic memorabilia, old costumes, broken furniture, and discarded electronics that Brian had collected over the years, promising himself he would fix or repurpose them someday. Despite thorough searches, investigators were unable to find anything that definitively connected Brian Miller to the tragic death of Adrienne Salinas. Miller himself adamantly denied any involvement in her disappearance, insisting he had never even seen her, although the patterns in the crimes bore chilling similarities. It wasn't until April 2023 that Brian Miller finally stood trial. He was found guilty of the crimes against Angela Brasso and Melanie Bernas, receiving a sentence of 30 years in prison for each. Additionally, Miller was suspected in another case involving a 13-year-old girl who was attacked, lost her life, and whose remains were dismembered back in 1992. However, no DNA evidence linking Miller to that particular case had been collected, and therefore prosecutors were unable to prove his involvement. As for Adrienne Salinas' case, it was never brought to trial due to the complete absence of solid evidence. Over the years, no new suspects, credible witnesses, or substantial leads have emerged. Her disappearance and death remain unsolved, standing as one of the most haunting and mysterious true crime stories in the history of Phoenix. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.